All right, today we're diving into something pretty radical. We're exploring an idea that tries to connect two worlds you'd think are completely separate: ancient scripture and quantum physics. The question is this: what if the Quran isn't just a book of metaphors, but a direct description of the code that actually runs our reality? So let's get into it and unpack this fascinating and, provocative framework.
And this quote, right from the source material, it really sets the stage. The whole idea here isn't about random supernatural interventions. It's about a consistent underlying system. You know, in physics, there's this concept called unitary evolution. It's basically the set of rules that governs how a quantum system changes over time. And the argument here is that this is how the universe works, not by breaking the rules, but by executing them flawlessly. So here's the big question we're tackling head-on. What if the verses that have always been read as allegory are actually precise, literal descriptions of quantum mechanics? Is it possible this text is a kind of blueprint for the universe at its most fundamental, most granular level?
Okay, so this gets us to the heart of the matter. The argument we're digging into claims that this isn't just some clever analogy. Nope. It's a claim about a much deeper structure to reality, what's being called an information geometry, where the text of Scripture maps directly onto the fundamental physics of everything. The whole idea is built on three main pillars, and each one is tied to a specific set of verses in the Quran. Think of it like a journey. It starts with an observation, that leads to a collapse of possibilities, and then you're left with one of two distinct paths. First, we're going to look at a verse that supposedly sets up the boundary of what we can even know. Then we'll dive into a passage that seems to describe a wave function collapse. And finally, a verse that's said to reveal the only two ways forward after that collapse happened.
All right, let's jump into the first key, the measurement boundary. The source material points us to Surah 6, verse 2. This is the verse that, according to the theory, defines the fundamental limit of our observation, a concept that is absolutely central to all of quantum mechanics.
Okay, now this is where the interpretation gets really interesting. Look at the two columns. On the right, created you from clay, that's taken to mean our observable, classical reality. You know, the world of particles we can see and touch. But check out the left side. The phrase, appointed term is with him, is said to point to the unseen, pure quantum state. You can think of this light domain as what physicists call Hilbert space. It's the realm of all possible states a system could be in before we actually look at it. So this single verse is seen as setting up the two fundamental domains of reality, the hidden and the seen.
And what's wild is that this, according to the theory, maps directly onto a core principle of quantum physics called complementarity. This is the whole idea that you can measure certain things like a particle's position or its momentum, but you can never ever know both perfectly at the same time. You only ever get a piece of the information, a clay output, a measurement, while the full quantum state, the complete wave function, stays hidden from view.
Okay, so we've got the boundary. Now for the second key, and this is where things get really dramatic. If that first verse sets the stage, this next one is said to describe what happens when a choice is made, the moment of wave function collapse. And it's tied here to Maryam's moment of absolute crisis in the Quran.
So let's break this down, step by step, through this lens. Step 1. Maryam's cry, "I wish I had died, been forgotten," is seen as a system at maximum entropy. It's a state of pure potential, what physicists call a superposition of all possibilities, hope and despair all at once. Step 2. The divine response, "Do not grieve," acts like an observation, an environmental selection event. This interaction, which is step 3, collapses all the other possibilities and basically erases the memory of the other potential paths. And finally, step 4, the system purifies into one single, definite outcome: mercy.
This means we have to look at two really important Arabic words in a new light. In this framework, Razīm isn't just accursed. It's interpreted as the decoherence event itself. Decoherence is just the process where a quantum system loses all its weird quantumness and becomes part of our normal classical world. But then you have Rahīm, usually translated as mercy. Here, it's seen as the specific pure state that gets selected and preserved after this divine observation.
And that brings us to the final piece of this puzzle. So after the wave function collapses, after one single outcome is chosen, what happens then? Well, this framework points to Surah 6, verse 35 for the answer. It suggests that this verse reveals the only two quantum-allowed pathways forward, a tunnel or a portal.
So check this out. This table lays it out beautifully. According to this theory, once that collapse happens, there are only two ways you can go. The first is the tunnel, which is presented as being just like quantum tunneling. where a particle magically passes through a barrier it shouldn't be able to cross. The second path is the portal. And this is compared to quantum teleportation, that instantaneous transfer of a state through what Einstein called spooky action at a distance.
So first up, we've got the tunnel. This path is shown through the story of Prophet Yūnus. He doesn't die. Instead, he travels through the darkness in the belly of the fish. In this framework, that's seen as a particle tunneling right through an energy barrier it has no business crossing, a physical journey through that unseen quantum domain, the Barzakh.
The portal, on the other hand, is the path of Prophet Ḥīsā. Now here, there's no physical journey through a barrier. Instead, his very state is transferred non-locally. It's just like quantum teleportation, where the information that makes up a system is taken apart in one place and put back together somewhere else, almost instantly. It's described as a wave-like, instantaneous ascension. Okay, so we have the three keys: the measurement boundary, the wave function collapse, and the two paths that come after. Now let's put it all together and see the big picture, the grand design that this framework is proposing. And the glue that holds all of this together is the concept of the Barzakh. In this model, Barzakh is not a physical place you go to when you die. No. It is the quantum measurement boundary itself. It's the interface, the dividing line, separating the unseen, pure quantum states, what the theory calls the light domain, from the observed, collapsed classical world of clay.
And this one verse is kind of the mic drop for the whole theory. The signs it talks about are interpreted as being not just in the vastness of space or the complexity of our bodies, but in the very behavior of reality at the quantum level. From this point of view, all the weird, counterintuitive rules of quantum mechanics are the signature of the unseen acting upon the seen. All right, so let's do a quick flyby of the whole logic here. The framework argues that Surah 6, verse 2, sets up the measurement limit between the quantum and classical worlds. Then, Surah 19, verses 23 to 24, describe the collapse of a quantum state into a single purified outcome. And finally, Surah 6, verse 35, shows us the only two ways forward after that collapse, the particle-like tunnel or the wave-like portal. And the final takeaway here is, well, it's pretty mind-bending. If this interpretation holds any water, it completely changes the relationship between science and scripture. Science, in this view, becomes a study of an observable shadow, a shadow cast by a much deeper reality, a fundamental structure, an information geometry that's described not by equations, but by revelation. Which leaves us with one last, truly provocative question to chew on. In physics, the Hamiltonian is basically the master equation. It describes the total energy of a system, and most importantly, it governs how that system evolves through time. So, if this framework is true, could the Quran be the ultimate Hamiltonian, the source code that dictates the evolution of the entire universe? A fascinating idea to ponder.